Good evening, everyone. Thanks for coming out tonight. It's good to see you. I'm Deshaun Drew, the president of Minnesota Public Radio, and just thrilled to have a chance to get out of St. Paul, get up to Duluth, and spend time with our community. I'd like to start by acknowledging and express just deep gratitude to the College of St. Scholastica. We're celebrating 50 years of a partnership with St. Scholastica this year. They've been educational sponsorship. I'm sure you hear the educational sponsorship mentions on the air. 50 years, a really big deal. We're at NPR, we're 58 years old, so think about that, like almost since the beginning, and just a really core partner relationship for us across the state. Yes, thank you. I also want to thank our Talking Volumes sponsors, season sponsors, the Duff Endowment, and Episcopal Homes for their support. Without them, we wouldn't be here tonight. So, couple of days. There you go. Thank you. You get the drill. And I'd be remiss if we didn't thank our partners at the Minnesota Star Tribune. Duluth News reporter Krista Lawler is going to be up shortly. But I just want to take 10 seconds to say, if you haven't heard, those of us in public media are facing some headwinds, both with federal and state funding. There's threats to cuts to the Corporation of Public Broadcasting, which is the way the federal government funds NPR and other public radio stations, as well as Twin Cities Public Television and other TV stations, public television stations around the country. So you can learn more at npr.org if you're interested in getting a better feel for where that's going. We're also facing some headwinds with legacy dollars, which provides a range of things, including a lot of musical programming across the state. And I suspect some of you care about those things. But back to the reason I'm here tonight, which is to introduce Krista Lawler, who's going to take over and get this thing going. And I think bring Carrie up in due time as well. Let's get things started, my friend.
Hi, good night. I'm Krista Lawler. I work for the Star Tribune. I've been there for about the past 3 years, but I've been covering news in Duluth, Minnesota for more than 25 years. We are co-sponsors on this event, and so I just wanted to alert you to some things coming up in our books pages on Sunday. I see so many people here I know. Hi, Jamie. Claire. What's coming up this weekend is The Boy from the Sea, and it's about what happens when a barrel containing an infant washes up on a small Irish village shore. So you'll look for that. Laurie Ostlin's Are You Happy?, which deals with desire and the threat of violence to the LGBTQ community. Another book that gets a review is The Names by Florence Knapp, and it's a debut that's getting a lot of much-deserved buzz, according to our reviewers. So keep your eyes open for that. Keep your eyes open for News from Duluth by me and my buddy Jana Hollingsworth. If you're not a subscriber to the North Report, hit me up and I'll get you signed up here tonight. So nice to see all of my friends.
Welcome, everyone. I'm Carrie Miller. This is a special springtime Talking Volumes. We are in Duluth at the College of St. Scholastica. We always appreciate the very warm welcome that we get when we come to Duluth. And as I was talking to people, they were like, finally, you're back in Duluth. It's only been a couple years, but it's really nice of you to welcome us as warmly as you do. We'll be back, I hope. Literature, if you're a reader, I think you know this. Literature is teeming with stories of accidental or arranged marriages. But I don't know if there has ever been such an inauspicious start to wedded bliss than the newlywed ship of Willa and Theodulf. We'll explain why. Here's what Willa thinks as she's reunited with her groom after weeks of being apart. He was a fraud, in the matter of his faith, to be sure, but also in a slew of other ways, and to expose him all at once would rob her of what little promise the years ahead possessed. There'd be time to parley with Theodulf. She'd wield her secrets like strychnine. What could go wrong? Peter Geye's terrific new novel is titled A Lesser Light, Please give him the warmest of welcomes to the stage of Saint Scholastica. That was a long way. Hi.
Sounds so grim when you say it.
I know. Well, it was. What could go wrong? I have to talk to you about the toxic chemistry of this marriage and this joining of these two people. I get the sense that you thought a lot about what the character of this marriage would be like, what the fabric, the essence of it would be like. Tell me a little bit about that.
I certainly did. I think that as much as I conceived of Willa and Theodulf as characters, I conceived of their marriage at the outset.
As a character.
Yeah. And as a mechanism in the story to create a kind of rich and awful tension. Yeah. I mean, they exist independently, of course. They are individuals, and they have their own lives. But for Willa especially, that life is upended. And the consequences of that upending, which lead at least to her mother's way of thinking to this marriage, are pretty traumatizing. And she brings that trauma with her to the lighthouse.
What I think that as I thought about the texture of this marriage and this joining of these two very different people, your challenge seemed to be in some ways both of these people are bringing a burden into this marriage. They both have their histories. They're both difficult people. I felt like I was not reading a story of one person is the bad guy and the other one is the person that comes in with all the redemptive features here. That you were sure to put them on kind of an equal ground. Is that right?
I mean, certainly I aspired to do that.
Mission accomplished, Peter.
Mission accomplished.
Yes.
I feel like, let me take a step backwards first and say that I think of all the institutions in our culture, parenthood and marriage are a couple of the most fraught. Yeah. They can be the most beautiful, the most wonderful, the most amazing, and oftentimes are. And I don't know a whole lot of people who end up together like Theodulf and Willa do. But it's more interesting to me when people like that do get together. And I've never thought it was important to write characters that everyone would say, oh, I love that character so much. I mean, there are plenty of wonderful characters like that in our literature, but I don't understand when folks think, oh, they're unlikable or they're difficult, and then that disqualifies them as interesting characters. And to me, that's when things just get most interesting. And so with these two, I of course want them to have redeeming qualities. I of course want them to be vulnerable. I of course want them to be multi-dimensional and to feel some happiness, if not a lot of happiness. And I want them to both be presented, I wanted both of them to be presented with the opportunity to evolve.
Yeah. Let me stop you there for just a second, because I'm thinking about some of the other conversations we've had, and we've talked about your abiding interest in what it takes to sustain a long relationship, a long marriage like this. And I think the last time I talked to you about this, it might have been, a decade ago. And I wonder if you have some new, in your own marriage, witnessed more people in your family in these long marriages, some new revelations about that, some new awareness about it.
I hope that as I get older, and I certainly feel older all the time, I hope that I'm evolving as a person in a way that's making me easier to live with. That's been a big goal
It's
of
making
mine.
you easier to live with?
That's making me easier to live with.
What
And
made you difficult to live with in the beginning, would you say? Yes, we have time. Yes.
I take the fifth, or plead the fifth.
No.
Excuse me. No, I mean, I think that I have been. I think that some of the things that have made me difficult are that I've been an impatient person. I think that I have had or kept a version of myself somewhere in my own mind that is at odds with actually functioning in the world, which is to say, all I want to do is sit there and write these books, and life doesn't allow for that, especially with kids and with the family. And so I mean, of course I'm going to do the thing that I love most, which is write these books, but I also have to be a member of my family. And I think when I talk to my kids nowadays, one of the refrains that comes up is, "Dad, you're so much nicer than you used to be."
Oh, wow. Wow.
And that's a
How do
direct
you-
quote, and it happens all the time, and I know that I am. And the reason that I know that I am, we've just gone right to it. I knew
Yep.
this was going to happen.
You did.
The reason that I think
And you
that,
came anyway. Go ahead.
I think that the reason that this is true, that I'm nicer now, is because I'm more patient with them, and because I'm more patient with myself. And I have a better and fuller understanding of who I am and how my work, that is to say the books I write, fits into the rest of my life. And so once upon a time, if my kids had a soccer game, I would have dreaded going to the soccer game if it was happening at the same time that I was supposed to be writing. And now I have, better perspective. And it's more fun to watch older kids do their things than it was to watch little kids, run around and do cartwheels instead of actually playing the game. But it's also true that I feel like I have a better perspective on it. And that has come, I'll say it plainly. So about a decade ago, I had a marriage end, and about 6 years ago, almost exactly, I had a second marriage begin. And I would never say anything bad about the mother of my children. She's an amazing woman. She's incredibly accomplished. She's one of the smartest people I know. And our marriage wasn't conducive to me being happy in the arena of raising our kids. Mm-hmm. And now I am. Now I have a better perspective on that. I have someone that I feel like is a better partner for me in that. And hasn't been easy. None of it has been easy, of course. But I feel like everyone is finding their level. And when I hear my kids say, "You're so much nicer than you used to be. You don't get mad at me all the time," that is all the proof that I need about the choices that I've made. And I feel better as a father, and certainly I feel better as a spouse than I used to. And I think that in the work, so when I think about the marriages that I've portrayed in my work this is now my 6th book, which is hard to believe, they've evolved as I have evolved. And though this marriage is incredibly broken, the marriage in A Lesser Light, from the first moment we see it, right, it's also complicated and complex in ways that I couldn't have conceived of if I hadn't been through all that I'd been through. And in my last book, there's a very happy marriage, and I couldn't have conceived of that one either.
Right, right. I want to come back to something that you said a few minutes ago about the perspective of where your work fits into your life. I think this is brave and candid to admit that the work is not all-consuming and all-encompassing, and that's the way artists and writers are, and that's how it should be. I mean, what you're What you're saying tonight is, I know where it fits, and it can't drown out everything else that is important to me about being a fully realized person.
And
And you took some time to understand that?
I did, and I think that that's, I think that you've described it very well, how I feel about it. And I think that what I feel happening, certainly what I felt happening writing A Lesser Light, is that realization that, though of course the work is incredibly important and it is time consuming when you're doing it. I don't know why I'm talking about myself in the second person. It's time consuming when I'm doing it. I feel like the fact that I have this awareness about myself, and it makes me sound like I don't even go to therapy. I don't know where I'm getting this from, but I feel like that it makes the work better. That is, if I'm not just thinking about literature, then the world becomes fuller, and there's more interesting things happening in it. Hopefully there are anyway, and that's also a consequence of exactly what you just described, of realizing that, okay, even if the soccer game or the track meet or the tennis match or the ski jumping gets in the way of work, it's better than the work. And honestly, I didn't always think that.
Here's the other thing that I noticed about the quality of the marriage. For as adversarial as it is in the novel, there is also compassion. And as I heard you describe what you've learned about yourself and about what it takes, to bring to a longer marriage, I thought, maybe that wouldn't have been your instinct if you had been trying to write this 10 years ago and not understanding what you now understand about marriage.
I certainly think that my perspective and my evolution as a person comes to bear on this relationship. And I think
in the novel, yeah.
Right. And I think that one of the reasons I've been, that I felt so freely about writing the many shades of this marriage, and I really did. I felt like I could do anything, and it wasn't going to damage the story.
What do you mean by that?
Well, that it wasn't that my own, formerly my limitations as a father, as a spouse, would have gotten in the way. Like I would have put limits on what the characters might do, because I didn't want to confront the possibility that I might be capable of doing some of the things that they do, or something like that. And now that doesn't exist at all. And I've tried for a long time, really as long as I've been writing novels, to be empathetic with my characters like that, and to live vicariously through them. But it's just true that I'm better at it now than I used to be, and I hope and think that that's partly because I'm better at being a person.
Yeah. I mean, how do you think some of the self-awareness that you've clearly wrestled with and come to some decisions about, does it give you a sense of courage or confidence in tackling what might be the kind of complexity that maybe was elusive, in some of the earlier novels?
I think I would call it confidence, not courage. I think if I'm given those two words, I'm certain that the dysfunction that exists between Willa and Theodulf was not fun to visit on a daily basis.
Oh, really?
I mean, it's fun on the one hand, because you get to meddle with these characters, and you get to shape their lives, and you get to try extraordinary things and have them say extraordinary things and say things like she would wield it like strychnine. But then you go back and you think about who they are and whether or not you've overstated their intentions or their object. And you work on it from there. I work on it from there, and it's in that work, the second part of the work, where my own self-awareness comes to play, and my own confidence that I can write about. I can make Willa observe something like this, and she observes worse even than that over the course of the novel, and know that that doesn't mean that she's a horrible person, that it means that she's in an extraordinary circumstance that has her baffled. She's a young woman. She's totally out of place and out of time and grieving in ways that she doesn't understand on multiple levels. And so, yeah, she gets a pretty wide berth for the range of feelings that she would have. And I think to visit again the way that I myself have evolved as a person, I wouldn't have necessarily seen that.
Yeah.
I might have thought, oh gosh, she's just being a jerk. Like, let's dial it back a little bit. And there were definitely times when I have to do that, but more often than not, it's, well, let's take this moment where she's feeling this terribly and see what happens in the next conversation or on the next day or in the next scene.
Here's what I think is the most interesting about compassion. I think as a reader and, as people in personal relationships, we know it when we see it. But compassion can be really nuanced, multifaceted, and you clearly understand that in a way that I think just shines through the middle of the book. What do you think?
I mean, I'd love to hear you say that for all sorts of reasons, not least that I think, so I'm going to take a little bit of a leap to get to the answer to that question. One of the things that features in the book is Beethoven's Moonlight Sonata. And I listened to that over and over again as I was writing the book, probably 1,000 times, and I don't think I'm exaggerating. Every time I sat down to write, and sometimes 3 or 4 times during a day. And for those of you who don't know, I didn't know before I started writing the book. It's written in 3 parts. The Moonlight Sonata is, and the middle section has been described historically as a flower between 2 chasms. The first section being dark and brooding, and the final section being dark and brooding, and the middle section being this sort of peppery, like almost like you could, take a jaunt down the sidewalk. And what I realized was happening as I was writing the book is that the middle of the book felt that way. Like there's a lot of happiness that exists in the middle of the book. For Willa, yes. Not as much for Theodulf, though Theodulf does revisit his memories where his happiness lies. But for the rest of the cast of characters. And I don't know if it's just the way the music was working on my subconscious or if I was trying to lighten things up a little bit, but I felt that way. And I felt that way especially in the relationships that Willa forms with the other lighthouse keepers' wives and the relationship that she forms with the little girl across the cove, in the way that she has come to understand and is starting to grapple with her own fate, which now seems sealed to her. And so I think that I hope that's an answer to the question about the compassion. She's certainly, I think, feeling compassion for herself, which I don't think if she had to take a time out in the middle of Act 1 and describe her state of mind, that it would be like, okay, I can be objective and I can take it easy on myself. She's come out with guns blazing, for sure.
I wondered about the music and whether you just really knew this piece of music so well that you could use it as kind of a current underneath the prose, or whether you were listening to it as you were writing.
I know nothing about music except what I love to hear. And all of the language that attends the descriptions of the song are learned for the purposes of writing the book.
Really?
Yeah.
Wow.
But I'll tell you also that I feel now about that song. I was I was listening to it a little bit in preparation for the book coming out and for a couple of talks that I was giving. And I used to walk around the house when it was playing, and I don't know how to play the piano at all. I might as well have boxing gloves on. But my fingers move and became so accustomed to moving to where I thought they would go on the piano. And like I can hit every little key that happens, which is crazy. For starters.
Wait, hold on. So you don't know how to play the piano.
Right. It's only where I imagine like the keys being struck.
So you really, though, you have a visual of
yes.
This is what the hands are doing.
Yes.
This is where the piano keys are as this part of the music's being played.
Yes, and whenever there's a note that comes out of nowhere, which happens all the time in this, my finger can go over there to that note that's unexpected.
Huh.
I don't know exactly what that means, except that it became such a part of the experience of writing the book. And I think because I was listening to it as much as I was, its place in the novel became more and more important. Mm-hmm. It's also true, I think at least my intentions were that music would, and it's all over in the book, that it would give the reader a moment to pause.
Oh, yeah.
And give the reader a moment to reflect on something. I mean, it's all very tied to the psychic nature of the characters, but when either Theodulf or Willa, both of whom have a long relationship with the Moonlight Sonata, when it's there for either one of them, there's a reprieve. Almost always. There are a couple of instances when there's not, but it's a moment for them to take a deep breath.
Wow, that's really interesting. What I felt, the music and the descriptions were there about it. First, we're learning a lot of things about Willa and what music means to her, and how I think in some ways it's kind of taken, well, she's been shaped as a person because she has this relationship with this instrument and this music. But it also felt like you were giving me momentum, and I felt the music kind of pushing that in the parts of the book where the music really kind of came to the fore. And I don't remember that in other books of yours.
There's always been music in them, I think, but never to the extent that there is in this one. That is, it's always been in the background.
Okay.
And in this novel, it's very much in the foreground.
And did it provide a kind of catalyzing momentum?
Absolutely.
Parts of the book?
Yes. Not parts of the book, the entire book. And when you say catalyzing momentum, I mean it was a condition of writing the book.
Wow.
Yeah.
Interesting.
Not every day, but almost every day. And
you mean I would go in and I would listen to this music,
yes,
and I would know the current that I was stepping into in the book.
And as much as the current that I was stepping into, the mood that I was stepping into. And so there were days, this is a perfect example. There were days, I can recall perfectly the scenes that I was writing. And one of them is there's a moment in the story when Willa is discussing her marriage with the matronly one of the other lighthouse keepers' wives. And it's, to my way of thinking, it's a lighter moment. I think it's pretty funny. And I wouldn't.
She compares him to a potato.
This is not the one. She's the older woman is describing what wives do.
Oh.
And she catalogs. She's got 10 items that she's counting off. And it's, like it's me taking a shot at all the men, sorry men, for our gentle tender egos and incredibly vain selves. And she doesn't want to hear the first or the third movement of the song.
Ah.
I only played
Oh,
the
wow.
second movement of the song that day. And that's a true story. And I think, and that's, by then I was aware of the ways in which it was taking up space in the writing of the book and the way that it became important to writing the book.
Here's a confession. When I took Willa's measure, I thought, yeah, I can spend the next 500 pages with this woman. I love her. But you made a decision to switch up the voices. And there's a risk to that whenever a writer decides to do that, because you're pulling. And how many different voices are we in the perspective of?
There's 5 point of view characters.
So tell me about whether you recognize the risk of that and what you tell yourself about that risk.
So no doubt in the recognition department, I had a writing teacher back when I was a student of all this. I'm still a student of all this, but when I was an official student of this, and they said, you know, when you do that, when you introduce another narrator or another point of view, you run the risk of the reader favoring one or the other.
Oh, yeah.
And then skipping over, oh, I don't want to read this guy's. I'll go a page ahead to the next guy.
Or you're pulling us in some ways out of the all-consuming perspective of this character, and she is kind of all-consuming.
As is Theodulf.
For sure.
And Celia too, the young girl, to a lesser extent.
So
I mean, for me, a couple of things happen. One is, I don't want to tell the story all from her point of view. It never occurred to me that she would tell the whole story. Partly because I wanted it to be so much a story about these two people at
and
odds.
We had to be in his perspective,
I felt
too?
like it would have been unfair to have her have the whole story. But I think that, so that's like an instinct as much as it is a conscious decision about the craft of writing. But when the craft of writing part comes into it, there's all sorts of reasons to diversify the point of view strategy, even knowing the risk of alienating readers from one scene to the next because they might not like Theodulf or they might not like Willa. But I'm not, I don't ever think like, oh, what happens if they don't like her? Of course, there's going to be parts about her that they don't like. Same with him, and same with Celia, and on down the road. The other 2 points of view, there's just a couple sections from her uncle's point of view, and then there are italicized sections as well. So there's a quality of almost like a chorus in the novel, and we're going to get the story. And the story is, many parts of it are consciously written this way, where we see something happening from here, from one character's perspective, and then the same scene or moment from the other character's perspective right here. And what that gives me as the writer, and hopefully then gives the reader, is a sense of like, oh, I'm getting both sides of the story, but also the way that they aren't going like this, they're going like this. And one person's story is affected as much by the other person's as it is their own.
Makes sense. It isn't I guess I wasn't asking you about the risk of I might not enjoy spending the next 100 pages with whoever. I think it's more of being immersed in the perspective and mindset, I guess, of the character, and then being kind of pulled from that experience but now you have to look at it, and maybe I'm thinking of the young girl's perspective, but now you really have to look at this from her side. Why?
I mean, the answer to the question why is because that it's more interesting. It's more interesting to have to hold the magic mirror up and spin it around and see everyone's.
Is that how you think about it?
It is how I think about it. And I'll say one more thing about it at the risk of sounding arrogant. I think that when I make that decision, that is to use multiple voices, I know that people are going to like Willa more than they're going to like Theodulf. You'd be crazy if you liked Theodulf more than you liked Willa. But also, I'm going to make him interesting enough, and his perspective is going to be as interesting, if in different ways, as
Definitely.
hers, because I know them so well,
Yeah.
and because I can do this.
One of the other things you do is you use an omniscient voice. And I have to tell you, Peter, I was like, is this the lake? Is this who's telling this story? You're smiling like you've heard this before, or why couldn't I figure it out?
I wonder, no, definitely not that. I wonder, what's a way of saying this? So I get to the end of writing this book, and it takes me, 5 years of my life to write this book. And I don't know the whole answer to the question, who is that omniscient
Are you
narrator?
kidding me?
I'm not. Except I'll say this, and this is you'll have to give me just a moment to explain. So this is novel number 6. It has been my life's work, at least the work that I care most about. We've covered that ground already. And I think about it all the time. And it is so much more than an occupation for me. It feels like I do this work instead of going to church. I do this work instead of trying to understand everything that's happening in the world right now. And that work that I love so much, and that's how I think of it, is part of the ubiquitous project of human life, narrative project of human life. And I'm not talking about the stories that we read and write, although they're included in that. I'm talking about the songs that we sing, the sermons that we hear, the letters that we write to our loved ones. I'm talking about all the mythologies and all the world, and like it's all swirling around us all the time. And if I had to give an answer to that question, who is it? I would say it is rain falling from that.
It's rain falling
It's like from all of those stories.
This is not where I thought this was going.
It's like the stories of our lives. It's
just the swirl of.
It's the project of storytelling in human life, which
really?
is all of those things.
Wow. It is, it's just a narrative of.
Personification of that voice.
Oh my gosh, wow.
But
And I'm
that's just
going,
my
is it the
my
lake?
take.
What is
That's
the
just
lake
my take.
speaking here?
I think sometimes it's the lake. I think sometimes it's the author's consciousness. I think sometimes it's the subjects that are written about in those sections announcing their place in the novel. I think sometimes it's the story itself asking for a say in things. And
So let me make sure. So you got to the end. This was already in the book.
Yeah.
You got to the end of it and you were like, why did I do this? But I'm keeping it.
Not quite. Close. I got through about a third of the book. Okay. They began as an organizing principle.
Okay.
And as a like entree into any given scene. And I thought they won't be here in the end, but I
Because I'll have figured this out.
Yeah, and
Okay.
I'll get it. I won't need that like kick in the pants to get into this chapter, to get into this scene. But the more that I wrote them, the more that I realized that something was happening. And I realized it like, I really like these passages. I think they're interesting. I think some of them are pretty beautiful. Mm-hmm. And what is this? And so I was like, it must be the lake telling the story. And then I was like, no, it's not that, because there's all sorts of other things. And by the time I got to the end of the book, I knew that they felt essential to me in the storytelling. And a considerable part of the story altogether. And I was confused.
I just want to read a few for our listeners and for our audience who have not had a chance to read the book yet. I want you to know what we're talking about. So here's one of these kind of omniscient, right, reflections. If you stood on certain seashores long enough and with unwavering eyes, you'd see the moon pulling the water, the tides. When the moon's orbit is most distant, the attending tide is called apogean. Yes? When it's closest, perigean. The varieties between are many and many named, but they all speak to a force subtle and beguiling. That is really beautiful. Why do we need it?
In the chapter that follows that, so it goes on. You read the
I
first
read the
of
first
three
paragraph, right.
First of, I think it's 3 paragraphs. And
Yep.
some of them are just a paragraph long. The longest is a couple of pages long. Usually they're about 100 or 150 words long. What happens in the chapter, in the subsequent on that subsequent day, is that Theodulf and Willa have gone to a little settlement to collect the mail. He's showing her how to collect the mail, which at the time they did by boat in the summertime, and it has not been. It's been another of their bad days, and Theodulf is standing there frustrated with his wife, frustrated with himself, certainly, and he observes something called a seiche. A lot of people here probably know what that is, some may not. It's a singular wave that comes up out of nowhere and is usually on Lake Superior. The seiches are usually pretty small, like it would set a boat to rocking kind of thing, where it's otherwise a calm day. And so for Theodulf, in that moment, he's experiencing the emotional tug and pull of his marriage, of this particular day, and he's got to start figuring things out. And then this thing happens that he has no idea how to name. He doesn't know what a seiche is. So I need to tell, I thought if I tell the reader what a seiche is, or if this voice does,
Right.
then they can use that information, and certainly the story can use the information to help them understand in the history of tides where a seiche
Got it.
lies.
Okay. Did some editor try to take it out?
No, and I thought for sure they
Wow.
would.
Okay.
Yeah.
I was surprised. Okay.
You look unconvinced.
I am, yeah. They're beautifully written. I just really wondered, am I missing the point here? And it sounds like no.
No. Let me
Question mark.
I would say one more thing
Okay.
about it. So I think that, I know that certainly the next book I write and the next several books I plan to write are all tied in some way to this world, and directly and indirectly, and that in order for me to think about the connective tissue that might exist between those books, this strategy won't be used again, but that force on the story somehow will be.
Okay.
And for me to think about the whole project, the 5-book project or the 6-book project or whatever it is, it helps keep me cool, helps keep me calm in the face of that big project that I have this in my tool belt.
Right. It grounds you, knowing you've got all this kind of uncertainty and these questions to wrestle with.
Right.
And
And a partner in the storytelling.
Got it.
This rain that is going to come down.
All right. Okay, so let's hear the first excerpt. And I think to set it up, we can say that Willa has just arrived at the lighthouse station, which is, we'll talk about this a little bit after the excerpt, but we are talking basically the Split Rock.
Correct.
Okay. But you don't call it the Split Rock Lighthouse, right? Yeah, okay. But that's what it is. Okay. She's just arrived. She's going to be living there with Theodulf, this man she barely knows. A priest has accompanied them. What else do you want to say about it before we hear it?
only that Theodulf has made a condition of her entering her new home that she say confession. This is the kind of guy Theodulf is.
Not that he will, but she has to.
And so she is finally alone with the priest, and Theodulf has gone to fetch her other trunk from the boat. As the priest had gathered his cassock, so Willa now gathered her skirts. She knelt on the blanket there at the door of her new home. Father Richter peeked at her and then made the sign of the cross and whispered, "In nomine Patris et Filii et Spiritus Sancti." She wanted to howl, to make music with the beasts, to sing harmony to their heresies. His eyes were still closed, but Father Richter leaned toward her and said, "Begin with your venial sins, Miss Sauer." I am full of anger, she thought. Is anger a sin? Envy? Yes. Pride and greed? Yes. Sins. And I am full of these, but more than anything, I am full of wrath. We are all impure, each and every one of us, he said, as though reading her mind. Now there came from the near distance wolves barking, short and warning. It sounded like they might be on the other side of the house, 6 or 8 yelps. Father Richter looked quickly heavenward, then just as quickly down at Willa. He kept his gaze on her as though by force of will he might divine her secrets. When she didn't budge, he said, "If you do not repent, you will be, bless me, Father, for I have sinned," she began, recalling the rules she was expected to abide by. "This is my first confession since January." She saw an inscrutable smile rise in his beard. His eyes were closed again, and she could sense as much as see a kind of ecstasy in his fluttering lids at having won her voice. This sickened her, that she should be so unfaithful to herself, that she should let this man and his simple-mindedness prevail upon her. And in order to quell the nausea, she had a fiendish idea. "I have had impure thoughts," she lied. "I have been covetous, and I have been desirous, and that's not the whole of it." She saw his own eyes glance sideways at her. If he was dubious, she couldn't tell, so she pressed on. "I have lain with another girl. I would do so again." She feigned a caught breath. At this, he gasped, but because he was genuinely surprised, perhaps even stricken. Before he could regain his bearings, she added, I have taken the Lord's name in vain." She felt gleeful and hurried through a litany of false sins, idolatry, envy, blaspheming, sloth. What else was forbidden? Across the grounds, Theodulf reappeared with her chest. He set it on the path and continued to the lighthouse, avoiding her gaze as he went by. During their courtship, such as it was, he had spent their Saturday afternoons not promising primroses and complimenting her beauty, but proselytizing and praying and laboring over the 10 Commandments as though her conversion meant his salvation. That she so easily convinced her husband of her righteousness, well, it was a small thrill, especially now as she paid this entry toll into her new life. "Is that all, child?" Father Richter asked. What she didn't confess was that her true sin, born only in those moments with Father Richter, staring at her husband beneath the lighthouse in full regalia, was that she felt murderous. Instead of confessing anything more, Willa merely nodded in answer to the priest's query. And as he prayed over her soul, granting her pardon, assuring her absolution, and assigning her penance, she made a silent vow. Her covenant would be with the wilds, the wolves and the water and the celestial bodies. She would remain as agnostic as nature and as cunning.
from the mark beneath the cedar. I'm calling you to me. Come quickly, I'm calling you to me from the shores of sea. Big, beautiful creature, bring me your heart, and bring me your keeper. Where on this earth does your soul dwell? Can I open you up and take a smell? I am after your heart. I am after your heart. Fear strikes deep when you hand me your chalice, slaved away till your hands grew callous. I will not eat you, defeat you, or burn. I will only love in return. I am after your heart. I am after your heart. Big, beautiful creature, you come from the mark beneath the cedar. I'm calling you to me. Come quickly, I'm calling you to me from the shores of sea. I am after your heart. I am after your heart. Big, beautiful creature, big, beautiful creature, big, beautiful creature, big, beautiful creature.
Superior's Siren. Wow. You're listening to Talking Volumes at St. Scholastica, Duluth, with author Peter Geye. His new novel is titled A Lesser Light. So I want to talk a little bit about the history that you've clearly just plumbed in this area. And you've written about this part of Minnesota many times before, but not specifically Split Rock and the water and the coastline here. What is it that I first I want to ask you about deciding that you would tell the story around the lighthouse and what you then had to really understand about what life was like for people in this era, in this part of the world.
I think that the broadest answer to why the lighthouse really goes back to, as with so many of my experiences along the shore, to my childhood. And it was one of those places that we passed on our way up to the Boundary Waters or up to the campground, wherever we were going, and we wanted to hear about it when we were kids. And my parents were no historians, of course they weren't, but they took us there and we saw it and we wandered around and when we went down along the shore and looked at it from the lake and all of that sort of thing. And of course I wasn't contemplating writing a book about it then, but as I started writing about this part of the world, I just had almost like a list of places that I wanted to know more about and conceive of writing about, and Split Rock was at the top of that list. And it was only ever going to be a matter of time before I wrote about it. I think one of the reasons, and so more broadly, the landscape, the physical landscape, and the lake and that sort of thing, as the North Shore goes, it's one of the most dramatic stretches. It's, it's, I think, to my own way of thinking, one of the most beautiful, and it's also like when you look at it. When I look at it, I'll never look at it the same way again, because I feel like I feel like I've lived there for a year and was in fact a lighthouse keeper and a young girl and a poorly cast wife and all of those things. It demands our attention. I keep doing that. It demands my attention in a way that not many other places do. That is the lighthouse itself. And part of what I learned about the lighthouse is just how remote it was. And it still is, of course, remote. Like, you still have to drive up the shore to get there. But back then, there was no road. You were getting dropped off on a boat, or you were walking through paths in the woods to get to a place like this. And so all of that is like, oh, that's great stuff. You can put that in a novel for sure. And yep, you can. What I wasn't as prepared for was the amount of research that I would have to do, or that not even that I would have to, that I would want to do. It became, like a full-time hobby, learning about, not just about the lighthouse, but about what was around the lighthouse and why it was around the lighthouse. And some of this I knew just by proximity to the other books, but I've never done the kind of dive that I did to the lighthouse research.
I mean, there's a scene where Willa is out with another person out on the water, and she can look down through the water and see the carcass of a ship that has sunk. And it occurred to me that, the mythology and the stories and the folklore of this part of Minnesota, I mean, people, and to some degree maybe still do, but then, these were not, let me tell you a story about the time. They were integrated into their everyday lives in a way that I don't think we're really accustomed to, and in a way that I think you really captured.
It wasn't, I think now we have a habit, and now I do mean we, of taking for granted the lore that attends this place.
Yeah.
I mean, how many of us can sing The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald? I bet a whole bunch of us.
All right.
And, I mean, it's a terrific song, and maybe later we can all get together and sing that. But it's also, like then, even at the time of The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald, it was not a novelty. It was the very lives of the people who were living here. It's the foundation upon which Duluth is built. And it's where everyone made their living. It's where the real life tragedies happened. It's where the necessity for a place like Split Rock, it's why there was a necessity for a place like Split Rock. And it was more than all of that, or right alongside of that, or maybe above all of that, it was the building of this country. Literally, the building of this country happened from this port, or a considerable part of it did. And so when she's out on the boat and looking down in the book, it's called the Lisbon. In real life, it's the Madeira, I think. That's fresh. That's 5 years ago. There are still ghosts there.
Right.
And it's still real. They live here and get around on the water. Now we're lucky if we get in kayaks and go out on the water, or hop on the I forget, terrible for me to forget the boat that takes you around the harbor cruise. But you said something really interesting, the mythology, the folklore of this place. That's what I was talking about earlier. That's part of what it is. It's part of where the rain comes from, is all of that.
I mean, the other thing, and I remember talking about this with Leif Enger about his book, which, as you know, Lake Superior is a character. This sense of we live and embrace the volatility of this force that is in our lives, and we both endure with it, and fear it, and it can overtake your perception of what the world is. And I got a sense of that from this.
It's a huge part of the project. The part of the project of this book and part of the project of all of my books, literally all of them, that force is an elemental and fundamental part of the world that the characters have to endure. And I think part of the reason that that's been true, I mean, it gives a fiction writer in so many ways. It's beautiful. It's enormous.
The lake?
The
you
lake.
mean? Yeah.
And the wilderness, but more so now I'm talking about the lake. It is temperamental. It is haunted. I could go on and on. And we all understand that, or most of us do. Most people don't. When they say, "Oh, you're a lake." Well, how did this happen on a lake? Well, it happened over and over and over again.
Shipwrecks.
Yes, and
Yeah.
it has been happening for hundreds of years because it's as enormous, as temperamental, as dangerous as it is.
You know, the other thing that I've wondered about this is when you live in proximity to some kind of natural force, maybe it's a volcano, maybe it's a lake that claims the lives of people in shipwrecks, you live with, I think, an enhanced sense of not just mortality, but my fate is tied up with this mysterious and often misunderstood force of nature, and I'll never fully penetrate that. I'll live with that uncertainty.
One of my favorite moments in the book, it happens very early, so I don't think I'm giving anything away, but Celia, the young girl, has had this premonition that her parents, who left as soon as the ice went out to get supplies for themselves, Celia is certain that they've drowned. Mm-hmm. And she, in a kind of indescribable fit of something, she's walking down the shore getting ready to go hunting with her uncle, and she fires a shot out over the lake. And they have this exchange where her uncle says, what are you doing? And doesn't know how to articulate it, but what she's saying is, the lake took my
That's perfect.
parents.
Yeah.
And he says, you don't know that, first he says, but then he also says, the lake takes, but it also gives us everything. Mm-hmm. And I mean, I think that remains pretty true, at least in my own way of thinking about it.
The other thing that, as I was thinking about that, I was also thinking, if you are somebody who has given something to this force of nature, whatever it is, body of water, volcano, chasm, whatever it is, you have a different relationship with. Doesn't mean you're ever going to leave that, but you have a very different relationship with that. And so many of the people in this town that Willa and Theodulf are living in have that kind of, they've lost something to the lake, and they haven't left. Why?
Well, for the town folk, I mean, we don't know many of them, but there's a lot of money to be made. There's a lot of resources to be capitalized upon. This remains true. As you drive into Duluth, you see the enormous piles of taconite. We're still doing it.
Right.
Which is not a critique at all of the industry that goes on around here. It is to say that as tourists, I think we view the lake as this gorgeous, magical place. For the characters in this book, they're all working on the lake. And Willa is capable, more than capable. She's, in fact, fascinated by the physical beauty and the mysteriousness of the lake. But the other characters are out there fishing or moving the boat or running the lighthouse, or in the case of the townsfolk, cutting the trees down and putting them on ships and building America.
I was curious about the documents because there is so much intriguing detail about the shipwrecks. I found that to be some of the most interesting part of the book.
I love doing the research for this book, and not just about the Mataafa storm and what attended that, but about life at the lighthouse, about the industry and how the sawmills and the lumber camps worked. And that is a carryover from my second book, but I went to a whole nother level with it in this book, especially the lighthouse stuff. One of the things that I did was went to the Historical Society in St. Paul and read every logbook
Wow.
that was ever written at Split Rock.
That these are the logbooks that the
actual
keepers
logbooks.
were filling in. I didn't know they had those.
Yeah.
Wow.
I mean, it was, several bankers' boxes
Oh,
full of materials. And most of it was like painted today. But there were also just so many descriptions of weather, of odd things that happened. The wolves howling back at the ship. All of those sorts of things. It was all in those documents.
I mean, you can tell that the person that is observing the keeper, the lighthouse keeper, their role is not just to make sure the light is turning, but they have this real sense of obligation and responsibility. And so I think that infuses their relationship with their environment with a really different feeling than I'm the guy that comes up and lights the light, and then I turn it off when it's over.
And that's what we were talking about. That was an essential job in the building of this nation. Were those jobs, and the sense of duty was militaristic. I mean, what we think of now as the responsibilities of soldiers, of military personnel. That's how they viewed their responsibility, and it was that serious and that essential. I mean, now the lighthouses don't even run because there's so much other technology. But in 1910, that technology was some of the most exquisite in the world, and fascinating to learn about and to write about. And it's one thing to be fascinated by it and to learn about it. It's another thing to bring it into the novel and have it be true in the sense of this is how it worked and this is what it looked like, but also then mean something else. Be working on that level of, okay, this is how the lighthouse was operated, and these are the people that operated it, but that all of that machinery is metaphorical or allegorical for the lives that were being lived there.
One last question before the last excerpt, and then we'll open it up for Q&A in the audience. Do you think, you've written a lot about the myths and the lore and what it means to be a Northerner and a Minnesotan. And I guess I wonder if you're left after 6 novels with, an abiding question about what it means to be who we are.
That's such a great question. I don't think I would add Northerner. I think that I would say human. And I know that maybe sounds grandiose, but I think that one of the risks of talking about books like this or books like Leif Enger's I Cheerfully Refuse or any of his other books, or books that are written by people who live here and people who are from here and people who revere this place, and live here for a reason is that what's a way of saying it? It almost diminishes what it is. And I think that what I have tried to write about, if I were being honest and answer that question, yes, of course, my characters are Minnesotans through and through, and they are meant to resemble this place and stand in as spokespeople, in a sense, for who we are. But we are also Americans. We are also citizens of the rest of the world. And I think that for me, that's just as important as capturing any sort of stoicism or other quality that we think of when we think of ourselves, or that I think of. I'm doing it again. I don't know how many times I've reverted to the second person. When I think about who we are. And if that sounds grandiose, you'll just have to forgive me. But I do think that the books that Leifinger is writing are as important as any of the books being written anywhere. The books that Louise Erdrich are writing,
Don't misunderstand that, there's a certain genre of Minnesota writing. No, not at all. But I think you continue to kind of plumb the question of what makes us who we are. Yes, on a human level, but what makes us who we are that remain drawn to and connected to this place?
Yeah, I think that probably, so the answer to that is that these are the people that I know best. And it's true that I wasn't alive in 1910 to meet any of these people. I sometimes feel like I probably was, but that there's a long, I think often of my grandmother, and I don't know why, who lived to be almost 100 and who was here for most of her life. And she was a complicated and flawed person, but also one of my favorite people. And I think in terms of a conversation like this about her and everything that she saw and everything and the way that everything changed in her lifetime, and the notion of living through the Great War, and then living through the Civil Rights era, and then living into the 2000s, which are baffling by any standard. And she was just this constant woman who would have made Theodore very happy, who could bake a cake, who could keep a house, but who also...
Just what he wanted.
Exactly, but who also had this kind of profundity of feeling. And you would never have known it unless you knew her intimately. And so I want to get to know these people intimately, the people in the book.
Makes sense. One last excerpt, if you will.
So this one...
And then some music, and then Q&A. So if you have anything to ask Peter, now's the time to think about it.
So this is Theodulf and Willa again. This is the 5th of July on that same year. She'd weeks ago quit trying to understand his moods or the vacancy of his expression. But this one, the shroud of sincere bafflement, of absolute defeat, well, this one at least intrigued her. She stood in the kitchen with a paring knife in one hand and a peeled potato in the other, waiting for him to say something. When, after another moment passed and he didn't, she spoke softly. "Do you have heat stroke?" He swabbed his face with the loose cuff of his shirt sleeve. "Sit down," she said, pulling a chair from under the table and then turning to fetch a glass of water and a tea cloth from the pantry. She imagined wiping his brow but handed him the cloth instead. He wiped his face, drank half the water. After he set the glass on the table, he said, "I had a letter from Mother today." He took the letter out from his shirt pocket and laid it beside the glass of water. Outside, Ruth and Ida crossed the grounds. Theodulf watched them, his eyes as distant as the noontime sun. "What did your mother's letter say?" He answered without turning back, "My father is dead. He passed in his sleep." "Oh my," she said, and sat across from him. She set the knife and potato on the tabletop and wiped her hands on her apron. "My condolences, Theodulf." They might well have been the first genuine and kind words she'd spoken to him since the day she arrived at the station. "Yes, well, you'll leave on tomorrow's boat?" He nodded. "Shall I join you? Is that the custom?" Now he turned to her. "No." He tapped the letter with his fingertip. "She asked me to come alone." He drank the rest of the water. I imagine her shock is matched only by her confusion. She needs my private counsel, I think, my calming presence. Willa's sympathy vanished. She looked between Theodulf's complexion and the potato. They could have been mistaken one for the other. The waxen color, the sheen, even the expression. "Yes," he said, as though to confirm his own thinking. "That's what she needs. That's why she asked me to come alone." Willa's lip quivered. She stood and turned to the pot on the stove. She quartered the potato, letting each chunk drop into the water. After dinner, Theodulf visited keepers Wilson and Axelson to inform them of his impending absence. Willa circled the house, watching from different windows as he searched them out and spoke with them. He moved like a thief, a wolf, quickly and with purpose. He found Mr. Axelson at the oil house and Mr. Wilson under the portico of his own house next door. The sun was still brazen at 8 o'clock when he returned. At his desk, he composed several letters. He asked for a cup of tea. All this while Willa moved anxiously about the house, as if a party would soon begin. He hardly spoke to her but to ask for the tea. At 10 o'clock, he found her in the sitting room. "I'll be turning in," he said. Willa set her book down. "I'll need you to bring me to Otter Bay in the morning." "That's fine." "At sunrise," she nodded. "Mother will be expecting a note of condolence." "I already wrote one. I'll put it on your desk." He appeared to take some satisfaction in this, as though his civilizing influence were the reason for her having written, not her own inherent good manners or general kindness. "Well, good night." He hesitated. "Theodulf," Willa said. She sat up on the edge of her chair, set her book down. "When my own father passed, your father's death and my father's death have little in common." He turned up the stairs. 2 months ago, she'd have fumed. Now she was only glad for his absence. She picked her book back up and held it toward the lamplight. She read, "Of these similitudes, the one which has the best pretensions to a rude accuracy is that first mentioned. For the resemblance of the full moon to a human countenance wearing a painful or lugubrious expression is very striking." Indeed, she thought, remembering her husband's pallid, ugly face as he ascended the stairs. She clapped the book shut, put it on the table, realized that the moon shone now in the bright summer sky, better to behold it than to read about it. When a child, Willa used to sit in her father's office on the top floor of their house and listen to him work. She loved the sounds of the graphs ticking out their information, her father's pencil tapping some code as he took his readings, his own mumbling as he riddled the forecast. He often described the weather as being predictable until it arrived. She understood that better now.
The water's high and I've lost my mind, and from the night the devil cries, I'll see you, I'll see you, I'll see you in hell. Sinking ships of momentary There's nothing left but the worst of it. I'll see you. I'll see you. I'll see you in hell. No light inside, darkness cannot hide. The end is nigh, the storm will not subside. I'll see you. I'll see you. I'll see you in hell. And now I try to do what's right. I'll see you on the other side. And now I try to end my life. I'll see you on the other side. I'll see you. I'll see you. I'll see you in hell.
Superior Siren, thank you. Wow. Could not be more perfect for our conversation. Tell us a little bit about that song.
Well, my project, Superior Siren, is influenced by Lake Superior and siren mythology. I'm from Duluth, and all that you've been speaking about, I strongly relate to. And with this song, I imagine a sailor going down with the ship and coming to terms with life and the mistakes and regrets and accepting and facing death.
Wow, as many of those crew members in the shipwrecks that you wrote about had to do. Thank you. It was beautiful. All right, questions for Peter. Let me just say this. You're listening to Talking Volumes. We've got a special springtime Talking Volumes. We're at St. Scholastica in Duluth with author Peter Geye, and his new novel is called The Lesser Light. Okay, questions for Peter. I saw a hand up, Tom, right there in the middle.
Thank you. First of all, I have to say that I haven't read your book yet, but I'm really excited to read it this summer, as you know. And a lot of booksellers and publishers who are not your own publisher have told me how fabulous this book is. It's your best one yet. I am fascinated by titles. And I talk to a lot of authors for my work, and I always ask, how did you select this title, A Lesser Light? What do you want readers to take away from this title that you selected for your work? And did you select it in the beginning of the process or closer to the end of the process?
All right, thank you.
Great question. So for this book, it was the title from the jump, from before I even started writing the book, or I should say right as I started writing the book. And it comes from a line in Genesis in the Bible. And it's a description of the moon. I think that the line is, and God created two lights, a greater light to rule the day and a lesser light to rule the night. And there was something about that sentiment, like the grandiosity of it, as with so many things in Genesis, but also that it is the lesser of the lights, when in fact, I suppose we can't live without either of them, and probably we'd have a harder time growing crops with only the moon. But it's in our mythology, the moon is every bit as romantic and beautiful and mysterious as the sun. And that was just one of the principles that I started with. And it's true that was the case, partly because of that line, but also because I wanted to sort of contrast with the artificial light of the lighthouse. And the only variation there ever was in the title was whether to call it a lesser light or lesser lights. And I settled on a lesser light along with my publisher, mostly because I wanted it reserved for the moon, which features so much in the story. Titles are, of course, such strange and difficult things. I've had titles from the beginning, titles that I've carried around with me for years, and titles that only showed up right before the book went to press. And I wish I understood better why that was true and all of the variables that go into that. But with this one, it was there from the beginning, and they would have had to take it out of my cold, dead hands to...
Question right up there.
Hi. I'm partway through the book and am loving it, the lush language and all the things you've talked about. One of the things that I find fascinating is your use of real events and real shipwrecks and things that we kind of know about, and sometimes you talk about them directly, sometimes you just sort of reflect a little bit, maybe like this storm coming, but you don't really talk about it very directly. I'm just interested in your process of how you decide to talk about real events, of course, masking them and changing them a bit, but I find that really fascinating.
I find it fascinating, too. Thanks for the question. When I wrote my first book, it's a book called Safe from the Sea, and it's about a fictional Lake Superior shipwreck. And so I made up a name for the boat, and I was fictionalizing the whole thing, but basing it on bits and pieces from other shipwrecks. And one of the shipwrecks that I learned about while doing that research was the same shipwreck that features in The Lesser Light, which is the Mataafa, which was a storm that happened here in 1905. And I presume many people know about it, but for those of you who don't, it's just one of the most harrowing real-life stories that you can imagine. It was a great storm, one of the great storms on Lake Superior, and the ship went out when it shouldn't have and turned around and was trying to get back into the harbor and ran aground just off the shore.
And everybody on the shore could see the ship trying to get in.
It was as far away as the back wall of this theater. And maybe a little bit further than that, but not much further than that. And all night, the town of Duluth watched this shipwreck happen in real time. And they were undertaking rescue efforts, and it was, but unsuccessfully, because the storm was so great, they couldn't get the lifeboats out, and they couldn't get the breeches buoy across to the boat, and the ship was essentially cleaved. And the people in the front of the ship survived. The people in the back of the ship did not. They froze to death. And I just thought, wow, half of the town of Duluth was on the shore, what we now think of as Canal Park, watching this happen with great raging bonfires. I mention that story partly because it never ceases to fascinate me, but also to say that when I was doing the research for that first book, I couldn't fictionalize that one. I felt a need to leave it as it was, and that carried over into this book. So though there are plenty of other ships that wrecked in the storm of 1905, this one kept its name. The Mataafa storm did, or the Mataafa did. But the other ships, like the one that is underwater right near Split Rock to this day, was the Madeira then, it's the Lisbon now. All of that is a long explanation. I think what I would describe as a method there is wanting to have the same flexibility with something like that, with the subject like that I have with the geography, which is one of the reasons that so much of the North Shore, once you get north of two harbors, is fictionalized in my work. So Otter Bay in this book is Beaver Bay in real life. Gunflint in this book and in several of my other books is Grand Marais. and on and on. And all of those choices are made partly to keep it make-believe, but also to give me flexibility in the storytelling.
Should we make Peter's brother ask him a question? Come on, Tony. When I ran into Peter's brother when I was saying hello to everybody, and there he was, looking a lot like Peter. No questions?
To his chagrin.
No
looking
embarrassing
a lot like
personal
Hi.
question? All right, question right
First
here.
of all, I've read 3 of your books, and I love them all. The last one I read was Ski Jumpers. But I love Split Rock. I've been there many times. I love the light. The first time I saw it, I was 12, and my father took us, and he was a mechanic, and he was so fascinated by it. He was actually telling the tour guide and sort of took over and led, to my mortification as a 12-year-old. And the other real memorable time, I took my 6- and 4-year-old grandchildren. And when my 4-year-old grandson rounded that corner and he saw that light, he said, "Oh, wow." And so loudly, and it just echoed through there. I just wanted to know if you remember the first time you saw it, if it was impressive or...
I'm sure that it was, and I probably said something like, "Oh, wow." I don't remember, though. I bet I was 4 years old or 6 years old or something like that. I will tell you, though, the first time I saw the actual light working. You know, they don't light it often. They do it on the anniversary of the Edmund Fitzgerald and for a few other special occasions. And it was such great serendipity. I can hardly believe it's true, but it is. We were camping, as I often did with my folks, and at Split Rock, at the campsite there. And it was late at night, and the kids should have been sleeping, and I was sitting at the fire with my back to the lake and kind of beneath a little hill, so you couldn't quite see. Unless you went to the top of the hill, you couldn't see it. And the kids were running around, and my daughter came up and she said, the lighthouse is lit. I'm like, "The lighthouse is not lit. Good joke. It's not lit." And she's like, and she was little, you know, she was probably 8 or 9 years old or something. And she said, "No, the lighthouse is lit." And I said, I'm having a really nice time by the fire. I'm not going to get up and go and check." And she was
You're
like,
so much nicer now.
"I'm so much nicer now."
Now we get it.
It's almost like we choreographed that.
Right.
But she's like, "No, it really is. You have to get up." And finally her brother was like, "Yeah, it's actually lit." So I got up, and it was, 10 o'clock at night or something on just any old day, but it was lit. And it was as I was starting to write this. So that actually tells me that she was 10 years old. So I saw it for the first time. And I tell that long story partly to show how much nicer I am now than I was then, but also to say that I was like, I had my breath stolen from me, and I was kind of like nervous and excited in a way that I don't very often get anymore. And I'm like, I bet that's how I felt when I was a kid and I saw some of these things for the first time. The first time I saw a freighter come into the canal, or the first time that I saw giant waves on the lake, or those sorts of things.
I see a number of people with books that I think they bought here. Are you game to sign
Absolutely,
some
yeah.
books? Okay. Thank you all very, very much for being here tonight. It's great to see readers and book lovers. Our thanks to Superior Siren and to Peter.